So, welcome to today's talk. Um, it's entitled uh, Working with Change and Uncertainty. It could be entitled Embracing Change and Uncertainty. And I think it also could be entitled uh, Working Ethically and with mindfulness and concentration and wisdom with change and uncertainty. So when I think about the Dharma talks I'll give on these days, I usually reflect on what's happening in my life and what's happening in current circumstances in my family and the people around me in my workplace and uh, my colleagues and friends, and also look at the world as a whole and consider what's going on in the world. Uh, and right now, there's been a lot of, right now in the world, we're in a it's been like this for a couple of years actually, but right now there's really particularly uh, uh, a number of things that are unsettling. Um, uh, there's a lot of change and uncertainty, and right now we have one disaster after another with climate change, and there's war, and there's been the arising of particular political persuasions and the increase of the far right, and discrimination based on race, gender, sexual identity, and religion. And currently, I'm noticing across the world, and maybe this has always been here, but there's a decrease in tolerance for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And hatred seems to be festering. It kind of reminds me, like somebody, um, um, one of my uh, patients or one of my clients told me that their adult child was talking about how the current situation reminds him of Germany pre-war, where there was, Hitler got in with, I think, under with not a dominant vote, but he got in nonetheless. And then he went about changing all sorts of things, and based on particular conditions or particular status of people, based on their race or their religion, and you know whether they were on the outside of things, where it wasn't inclusive, and so it's been really unsettling. But as I mentioned earlier today, uh, I'll be 69 in a couple of weeks, and I've been around for a long time, and I've seen many changes throughout my lifetime. This sense of change and uncertainty is perennial. It's kind of here. It's always happening, and I thought it would be a good topic to talk about how we deal with change and uncertainty. And as I also mentioned earlier this morning, uh, change and uncertainty are in fact characteristics of existence. And I think I mentioned them earlier. There's um, three characteristics of existence. They are anicca, dukkha, anatta. And when we talk about change, we're actually talking about anicca, which means impermanence. And when we talk about dukkha, dukkha, sometimes it means, well, it usually means unsatisfactoriness, or sometimes it's translated to suffering. Uh, in this case, when we talk about it as a characteristic of existence, it refers to how changing things cannot bring lasting satisfaction. And it also refers to a general sense of uncertainty, a general sense of unreliability in experience and in phenomena. Uh, Dukkha, uh, Dukkha is also understand it's the first truth, and I'll just talk about that in a little while. But in this case, what we're talking about when we talk about dukkha as the first First Noble Truth, it's about this subjective experience of dukkha. When we talk about dukkha as a characteristic of experience or a characteristic of existence, it refers to how all things are characterized by uncertainty, unreliability. They're not dependent. They're not able to bring about lasting and satisfying happiness. Uh, so this particular, that's my remote for my fan. That's impermanent, and it's also of a dukkha nature. It's unreliable. Because things change, we can't depend on them. And the other characteristic, of course, as I also mentioned earlier, is not self. And in Theravada Buddhism, we understand this to mean emptiness as well. And well, as you heard me speak about this morning, uh, not self or emptiness generally means there is no thing found in all this experience. It's interdependent. There's no solid, lasting thingness about experience. And we tend to not see that. So, coming back to change and uncertainty as characteristics of existence, I just mentioned that it's all dukkha is also understood as the First Noble Truth. But in this way, in the First Noble Truth, it refers to unsatisfactoriness, and that's subjective experience of, well, sometimes it's described as sufferings, but mostly, well, it's probably best described as unsatisfactoriness. Things, and in this case, however, when we're talking about it as a characteristic of existence, it's talking about how things, because things change, they're unreliable. They can't provide enduring happiness. And dukkha, as the First Noble Truth, is about our subjective experience of life. And it is possible to experience the dukkha nature of phenomena, but not have dukkha in one's heart, if that makes sense. It's like, this clock has the conditions of impermanence, not self nature, it's not a thing, and it's also of dukkha nature. And my relationship to it, I can have dukkha in my relationship to it, but in fact, I can be free from dukkha in my relationship to it. I hope I'm not sounding too complicated here. I'm just trying to differentiate the difference between dukkha as the First Noble Truth and dukkha as a condition, as a condition of experience. Sorry, a universal characteristic of life, basically. So, how do we cope? How do we cope with change and uncertainty? And how do we work with this dilemma? Well, I've kind of asked myself that question most of my life, and and I've responded to it by thinking, well, I adhere to the Buddha's Eightfold Path, basically. That's the way I work with change and uncertainty. And if we think about that question, it's the same question the Bodhisattva had. The Bodhisattva was Siddhartha Gautama before he became a Buddha. The Bodhisattva had that same question when he was challenged with the realities of aging, sickness, and death. And what he did, the way he responded to this, how he coped, was, well, he first of all went to leading meditation teachers and learned about the jhanas and practiced this to their what is the word? He became he managed to fulfill the peak or the ultimate of those particular practices, and he still found that wasn't satisfactory. So he went along the path of self-denial for 6 years, self-mortification, the practice of the extremes of denying himself any pleasure. And he found that that wasn't working. And he eventually went the middle way. He eventually decided that he wasn't going to be afraid of pleasure. And he decided to practice the jhanas again. And jhanas are states of highly refined concentration. And then he eventually woke up. And what he woke up to were the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths, as you probably very well know, are that there is dukkha, and that is that subjective experience of unsatisfactoriness. There is dukkha. There is birth, aging, sickness, death. There is not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, getting apart from that which is dear to us. There is pain, grief, lamentation, and despair. And there is also clinging to a sense of solidity, a sense of self, a sense of thingness, and that's intrinsically dukkha. So there is this reality of dukkha, and that's the first truth. The second truth, of course, talks about the origins of dukkha being the way we relate to these impermanent experiences. And if we relate to these experiences with grasping, clinging, craving, and so on, if we relate to them with greed, ignorance, and hatred, basically, then we're going to have suffering. So there's a relationship between the way we respond to experience and our experience of dukkha. So the third truth, of course, is freedom, nibbana, which is basically when we don't feed into our suffering with, so if we don't feed into our experience with craving, clinging, grasping, becoming, and ignorance and greed, and so on, then we don't have suffering. We short circuit the cycle of going around in this suffering, in these cycles of suffering, this birth, aging, sickness, death, pain, grief, lamentation, and despair. We we short circuit this. We short circuit the patterns of craving, leading to grasping, leading to clinging, leading to becoming, leading to birth, aging, sickness, death, leading to ignorance, leading to uh, sixth sense fears, leading to um, feelings, leading to craving, and so on. This is cycle of sometimes it's called dependent arising. That's the way dependent arising is sometimes described. So when we don't fit into suffering with craving, it ceases. And the fourth truth, of course, outlines the path of freedom, the path to the cessation of suffering. And this is the Noble Eightfold Path. And as you've heard me speak about many times, it is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and concentration, right concentration. And these factors, these 8 factors, work together. They work together in a way where they're supporting each other. And it's been compared to the spokes of a wheel, where there's 8 spokes, and if there's the absence of one spoke, then the wheel's not going to go quite right. So these 8 factors, compared to is analogous to a wheel with 8 spokes, and the wheel is turning towards liberation. So that's the Eightfold Path. And so coming back to how we deal with change and uncertainty in this contemporary world, how do we find freedom with inevitable change and uncertainty in the world that we see right now and around us? Well, I keep to the Eightfold Path. And in that, there's a bunch of systems as well. We have the 7 factors of awakening, which are factors that are involved with awakening. They are mindfulness. Well, they're factors of awakening. They are mindfulness investigation of dhammas, or curiosity and interest, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Equanimity. And there's other kind of little systems within this Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is really broad, but it um, has these principles of wisdom, ethics, and meditation, and within that we can find a whole range of systems. So another system that I like to use and consider is related to, it's called the five indriya, and these five indriya or faculties can be developed into powers, and they're kind of considered in a cycle, so there's no real beginning. But the we usually think about it as beginning with saddha or faith, which is also trust and confidence. So when we have confidence in something, or we have trust in something, or we have faith, you can call it faith if you wish, what that leads to is energy, which is the second power. Like energy, sometimes called effort, it's that capacity to do what is helpful and not do what is unhelpful, basically, in summary. Um, and then when we have energy, we're able to, we're kind of inspired or energized to practice mindfulness, which is, there's many ways of describing mindfulness, but let's say it's being present. It's being present for experience. It's being able to uh, track experience, for example, or be completely here now with whatever is happening with awareness. And then the next power is concentration or samadhi. And samadhi is this gathering together of mental energies, gathering together and putting them on one spot, putting them um, into one object, absorbing into an object. And with that, with mindfulness and concentration, with the with the combination of those two um, powers, wisdom arises, which is another power. And wisdom, there's a lot we can say about wisdom, and I'll talk about it in more detail in a little while. But wisdom here refers to being able to see things clearly, being able to know things. As I mentioned earlier today, I think wisdom is the combination of insight, like seeing into experience actually as it is, and also compassion. Well, actually, if you look at the Eightfold Path, the wisdom component of the Eightfold Path involves um, right view and right intention. And the way we can understand right view, I think, is also explained in how we understand insight. Technically, it's being able to see dependent arising, which is, I know I explained it one way just a few minutes ago, but another way we can understand dependent arising is by that phrase that's commonly cited in the sutta: when this is, that is. With the arising of this, that also arises. When this is not, that is not. With the ceasing of this, that also ceases. In other words, it gives this understanding of how things arise because of causes and conditions. Things don't arise in and of themselves. There's causes and conditions. And so these causes and conditions, sometimes this dependent arising is considered as the other side of the coin to emptiness. Emptiness being that there is no thingness in it. And sometimes the ways dependent arising is described, or emptiness is described, is, as I've also mentioned earlier, is as streams of dependently arising processes interacting. Rather than things, rather than thingifying things, we have these streams of processes and they're all interacting. There's no thing in all of this. So I think wisdom is being able to see that, and wisdom, right view is being able to see that, And right view is also being able to see impermanence, uh, uncertainty, and not self or emptiness. It's so this right view is being able to see things as they actually are, not as we project on them to them, not as we think they are, but as they actually are. And right intentions, and this is why I think it's part of what this is why I think compassion is part of wisdom. Right intentions refer to intentions. Well, there's three types of right intentions. These are intentions of renunciation, in other words, intentions of uh, letting go of a lesser cause of happiness to a higher cause of happiness, renouncing one thing for something better. And in my view, what we can do is we can renounce things that don't give us enduring happiness in order for us to realize some sort of enduring happiness, which we can find with nibbana or complete freedom. So, right intentions, uh, renunciation, intentions of renunciation, intentions of goodwill. And here I would say that these are intentions of compassion and warm benevolence. Like just this sense of being kind to another, being friendly. Yes, being kind and friendly, seeing the good in oneself and others, inclining towards wholesome interactions, helpful interactions, and so on. And the other kind of the other type of intention is the intentions of other intentions of harmlessness. They're called harmlessness. And I think you could consider those intentions as intentions of compassion. So coming back to how we now deal with uncertainty, what I've noticed is that if we can look at things honestly and where whatever we're clinging to, we can let go of that. Clinging to in an unwholesome way, in an unhelpful way, if we can let go of that, it helps. And you heard me say this saying by Ajahn Chah earlier this morning, and I included it in our meditation. Ajahn Chah says something like, let go a little, realize a little freedom. Let go a lot, let go a lot of freedom. I don't think I'm quoting him quite accurately here, but you're getting the gist. Let go completely, realize complete freedom. And that's true. This is this quality of letting go. And I just want to make a note that clinging and holding on to are different. Clinging is involved with this grasping after. It's kind of driven by a craving and a clinging and a grasping it's a holding on to something intensely without being willing to let it go. Holding on to is more like open-handed. I think it's useful to hold on to wholesome principles. And there's an analogy in Buddhism. It's called the raft analogy, and the Buddha made this in reference to crossing from one side of a river to another side of the river, crossing across a raging river. And on one side of the river, there's samsara with the entanglement of views, concepts, and craving. And there's, it's just the views are considered as like vines entangling you on one side of the river. And on the other side of the river is freedom. And if we want to cross the river, we need to have a raft. We need to cross the river, this raging river with a raft. And the raft we have is the Buddhist teachings, is the Noble Eightfold Path, for example, or those systems that I was talking about, like the 7 factors of awakening or the 5 powers. we hold on to it firmly. But when we get to the other shore, we don't pick up the raft and carry it with us. We let it go. We leave it be. So holding on sometimes is very, very helpful. Very helpful. So I think when we are faced with challenges such as being confronted with war, political upheaval, witnessing injustice, climate change disasters, inequity, and more, it's very, very important that we hold on to principles that are aligned with ethics, compassion, and wisdom. Um, because this gives us a kind of a security and a stability. Uh, yeah, I'm going to talk about equanimity in a little bit. And the way I see equanimity is that it is the manifestation of wisdom. And when I think about equanimity, it's also balanced by compassion. It's not like this, um, uh, it's not like the near enemy of equanimity, which is, kind of detached, completely detached, cut off, disengaged with the world around us. Equanimity may be kind of insulated from the world, but it is not disengaged from the world. So when I think of the courses, and I'll describe a little bit more about equanimity in a moment, but there's many ways to cultivate equanimity. And one way is to maintain impeccable ethics. Like sometimes people don't even meditate, or they've never meditated in their lives, but they have this power of impeccable ethics. They know principles of what is right and what is wrong. So when we're confronted with all these things that are happening in the world and we're shaken around, we can find a sense of equanimity, an unshakability, a sense of being centered, stable, still, calm in reflecting on our own ethical integrity, connecting with it, being with it. And it's interesting because when we do that, we actually see more. We actually begin to see the world and ourselves clearly without even doing any meditation, like without any. Well, actually, that's the practice. Actually, that's the practice. We begin to see the follies of the world, how people are often driven by greed, ignorance, and hatred. And it's really distressing to see what's happening, yeah, in the world. And you can see people are just being caught up with patterns of hatred, patterns of greed, and patterns of complete ignorance. Here, meaning they're not really seeing clearly. They can't see the big picture. They can't see the realities of what they're doing. So it's very helpful to hold on to principles that are aligned with ethics. And in this way, we maintain ethical integrity and principles that are not swayed by the powers of greed, ignorance, and hatred. So I was in a studio. I'm just kind of finishing off a program that I've spent the last year and a half recording in a studio. Yeah, I think it'll be a good program. Um, and it's taken a lot. It's a lot of effort, and I've written a lot, and been recording it. And yesterday I had someone, had someone beta testing the recordings, a dear friend of mine who has familiarity with Dhamma and also has a good ear. He's a musician, so he's got a good ear for problems that are in the recording. And yesterday he sent his feedback, and there's all these glitches everywhere in the recording. But yesterday I was working on the module of equanimity. It's module 7 in this 8 module program. and I was being reminded about equanimity. And I thought, oh, it's such a powerful approach. So, something about equanimity. Actually, I'll just see if I can find the words. Oh, yeah. Uh, and I talked about equanimity about a year ago, I think. It might have been equanimity as a divine abode. And just to remind you, some English words for equanimity can include peacefulness, emotional balance, centered, impartial responsiveness, calm, stillness, stable, unshaken, even-handed, serene, impartial, and equipoise. And often I've referred in training when I've done equanimity, when I've talked about equanimity or invited people to consider equanimity, I've also used terms such as a wise perspective, committed purpose, having inner stability, resilience, and the strength and power of being centered, stable, and grounded, and emotional flexibility like bamboo in the wind. And usually what I say there is equanimity is like bamboo. It's really strong. It's a structurally strong, uh, what is it called? The substance or structure is called, it's a structurally strong thing. I'm trying to find the right word for it. Can't find the category. But anyway, it's structurally strong, but it's also very flexible. It kind of blows in the wind. And it's a good analogy for equanimity. And the just to extend that analogy of the bamboo being flexible in the wind, in Buddhist psychology, there are 8 worldly winds. You probably remember me hearing me talk about the 8 worldly winds, but I'm going to say them anyway. The 8 worldly winds are circumstances or 4 sets of opposites that and circumstances that destabilize our sense of emotional balance. And these are circumstances that our egos often crave for, or yearn for, or fear and reject. And the 4 sets are these: praise or honor and blame, loss or failure, and gain or success, pain or unhappiness, and pleasure or temporary happiness, and fame or notoriety, and fame and fame and disrepute, or fame or notoriety, and disgrace, embarrassment, and insignificance, or social insignificance. Equanimity is unshaken by the 8 worldly winds. It's like this. It flexes with them. It's like that bamboo. It's just kind of goes backwards and forwards. So when we can do this, uh, when we can cultivate equanimity in whatever way we can, it provides us with that stability, that capacity to stand firm, to stand uh, in alignment with what is good, to stand unshaken by the things that are happening around us, which is pretty difficult actually, but it helps us. And going through my module and editing it yesterday, I was reminded of how the path of purification, which is this text that was written about 9 centuries after the Buddha was around in India, and it's a text on all the meditations you can do and how to do them, and it's called the Path of Purification. You can probably get a copy online. Sometimes there's free copies around, and it's very thick. I might even have a copy in here. No, it's in the house. It's a very thick book, but in it talks about 10 types of equanimity. And, I think we mentioned the different types of equanimity last year in the talk, including, say, equanimity as a divine abode, or the equanimity of the jhanas, which is the equanimity of stillness and quietude and spaciousness and so on. But there's also an equanimity called equanimity of formations. And, I'd just like to clarify that one a little bit. this one is this one, well, formations basically. Formations are things that come together, like we create things. There's something called mental formations. Um, Mental formations are creations that we have, and we need mental formations to work in the world and deal with the world and so on. Uh, Mental formations are often considered as uh, thoughts, for example, and we kind of we construct our world with mental formations, basically. Actually, we construct our world with perceptions and mental formations. You know, we create things. So, what happens with equanimity of formations is we begin to see how we've created our worlds, we created our suffering, which is included in our worlds, and uh, this whole creation is based on greed, ignorance, and hatred. And it's also about misperceiving these three characteristics of existence. So, misperceiving the three characteristics means that we have a wrong view about experience. Wrong view means seeing things as permanent that are not permanent, seeing things as self that can't be self, and seeing things as providing enduring happiness that can't provide enduring happiness. So, seeing the opposite of the three characteristics of existence. So, what's interesting here is that the way we develop equanimity of formations is by beginning to understand dependent arising, which I just spoke about before, seeing how we create things, but it's also being able to see clearly anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca, remember, is change. Dukkha is uncertainty, and also and anatta or is not self. So there's lots of ways we can do this, and one way we can do it is by just beginning to be present, being completely present, orienting our mind to be see the way things actually are, like stopping, rather than being feeding into our thoughts, rather than feeding into our mental constructions. We just stop and look. And what we see is that how we what we see is how much we create the world. Like just sitting here looking right now, I mean, we create the world because we need to create the world to function in the world. But if we decide to stop for a minute, we can see how much about what we think about the world is in our mind. It's just created. The reality of just this now is just this now. And I'm having a few thoughts about the world, and I can imagine in my mind, you know, Europe and America and different places. But if you really put that to the test, which is what I used to do with some of my uh, participants in groups that I used to run, I used to ask them to think of their house or think of their favorite food. You know, this is an exercise. I just used to ask them to think about their house and or their favorite food, and as if it's right here, right now. And then I'd say, well, where is it? What's the reality of that, your house right now? Where is it? And they'd say, oh, it's a thought. And I said, well, yeah, it's not a fact. The reality of that place right now is in your mind. So being able to be present, sit here now, without getting caught up in stories about life and stories about ourselves and stories about the world and so on, we begin to see how things actually are. And the way things actually are is there is just this. There is just this experience here now. That's why the Buddha orients all his meditation practices. He's orienting you to come back to the moment, come back to the reality of this. And there's lots of meditations. All the meditations are about that, actually. All the insight meditations, anyway. Uh, They're about being able to short circuit this tendency to create things. And what we see is that they are empty of thingness. These life is empty of thingness, empty of creations. So that I would say that would be one way to look into the reality of not self or the reality of emptiness. And you all know that I've been reading a lot of Chan Cha's teachings in this wonderful book, Stillness Flying, written by Achan Yasaro. Um, and I don't know this from before anyway, but I know this from when I used to live in Thailand. But Achan Cha used to say to often bring an attitude of my ne, which is Thai. My ne means not sure, not sure. I'm not certain. I'm not certain. Bring this attitude of not certainness or my ne to everything. Like people used to come to him and ask if they were awakened or they'd reached a stage of awakening or enlightenment, and he would say, my ne, my ne. And it was better to live with an attitude of uncertainty than it was to believe in something as true. So, but the way life is that it's uncertain. Like, I'm assuming that I'm going to have lunch, and I packed some lunch in the tea break. Made some lunch for myself so I could come out and have lunch straight away. But who knows? I might not make it. It's my ne. I could die as I walk outside this door. I could die at any moment now. Who knows? This place could collapse on me. My ne. It's much better to live in alignment with the reality of things than it is to be caught up. Sorry, we need to be caught up a little bit. We need to, if we need to, if we function in the world, we need to have some sort of certainty about it. I'm assuming that my lunch is going to be in there when I go in and have some lunch today. But can you see the point I'm making? What I'm saying is that if we attend to not self, if we attend to the uncertainty of life, it starts to bring us in alignment with the way things actually are. Um, and and impermanence, permanence, contemplating impermanence is another way of cultivating wisdom and cultivating equanimity. It's another way of practicing insight. So, with impermanence, well, it's pretty easy to notice impermanent, but we tend not to look at it much. You can look at it just right now. See how much is everything is changing. Like somebody's moving on the screen, our eyes are moving around, we can see outside. Everything is changing. Everything is in this flux. So earlier I pointed out and referred to the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. And I said that the practice of satipatthana, which is for the establishments of mindfulness, that practice emphasizes understanding dependent arising. It also emphasizes understanding the three characteristics of existence. And these three characteristics, they're emphasized equally. Maybe there's a bit of an increase of emphasis on dukkha, actually. But in general, there's this understanding of looking at these three characteristics of existence. By the way, if you can understand one, if you can see one, you can see them all. If you see the not self nature of something, then you also see the impermanent and not certain nature of that experience as well. And similarly, these qualities, these characteristics are generalized to all experience. And I've often made this analogy. If you can see the impermanence of a falling leaf, for example, you can also see the impermanence of a tormenting thought. So it's kind of liberating in that respect. So coming back to this last one of contemplating change, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit earlier this morning, and I invited to a bit of a practice of this. The 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing, as I mentioned this morning, the last tetrad, the last 4 steps, are all about impermanence. And they're all about insight. And the first step is to contemplate impermanence. And this is a difference with mindfulness of breathing, whereas mindfulness in general, or the establishments of mindfulness, emphasize all 3 characteristics. Mindfulness of breathing emphasizes impermanence. So we come to the, what is it? The 13, 14, 15, 16, the 13th step, and it's to contemplate impermanence. And as I mentioned this morning, we can do that in numbers of ways. And what it's emphasizing here is not only seeing the arising of things, which can be exciting, a brand new day or a new movie or a new meal or whatever it is, that can be exciting. But we not only do we attend to that, but we pay more attention to the falling away. And with the attention to the falling away, which most often we don't attend to, we don't attend to the falling away of our meal. We don't attend to the falling away of anything really. But it's very interesting to attend to the finishing of things, the ending of things. And most of us are not particularly inclined to attend to the falling away of our lives with our moment of death. Although there's, some of us are practicing death meditation and some of us do the 5 recollections, which are reminders of attending to the falling away of things. So when we attend to the falling away of things, or how things disappear, then that leads to dispassion. And as I mentioned earlier, dispassion is this cooling of craving. It's a cooling of the craving to get something, or to be something, or to and it is also the cooling of the craving to not be something, or to not have something, to reject something. And this is dispassion. Now, coming back to the equanimity of formations, I think that when we think about impermanence, dispassion and equanimity of formations are the same. With equanimity, which is this sort of centered, balanced, unshaken perspective, we are not swayed by pleasure, nor are we swayed by displeasure. We are kind of in the middle. We're not getting caught up in craving. So, coming back to working with change and uncertainty, I think firstly it's most important to maintain ethical integrity and see change and uncertainty as a reality of existence. And know that we can act skillfully or unskillfully, and know that we can act skillfully and unskillfully, and choose to act skillfully and not choose not to act unskillfully. Oh, I think I got that right. Basically, it's about being able to be wise with what we're doing and act in a way for the benefit of more beings, most beings, all beings, if we can. And I can't remember what Helen spoke about. There was one time we were talking about this, and Helen brought up a phrase by someone. Maybe I'll get you to say it a bit later. Can you remember that phrase? It was about, ethical behavior, like doing the best for the most. And yeah, I think you can remember it. So, and when we begin to cultivate wisdom, which includes compassionate equanimity, we are also able to see clearly through the deceptive ideas and make deceptive ideas and ideals that people are creating and putting out there, and make compassionate, ethical, wholesome, and wise stands on what we perceive in both our internal and external worlds. I'm sorry, I'm just reading my comments here. I think I wanted to read that. So, so I could finish the talk there, but I thought I'd finish the talk by adding the conclusion that AI gave me, which is really good. I think AI writes things much better than I write things, and it's pretty good. And I mentioned earlier how they changed the title of the talk from rather than working with change and uncertainty to embracing impermanence, embracing change and uncertainty. And this is the heading, embracing impermanence, a path to liberation. And I'm just going to read it to you. Embracing the impermanent nature of all phenomena is not about denying our joys or suppressing our sorrows. It's about cultivating a deeper understanding of reality, one that allows us to respond to life's ups and downs with wisdom and equanimity. By practicing mindfulness, cultivating equanimity, and developing compassion, we can learn to navigate the turbulent waters of change with grace and resilience. We can learn to let go of our attachment to fixed states and embrace whatever changing nature of our experience. This does not mean we never experience suffering. Life is inevitably filled with challenges and difficulties. However, by cultivating the qualities of the Noble Eightfold Path, we can learn to respond to these challenges with wisdom and compassion, finding peace and liberation, even in the midst of change and uncertainty. So that was what AI gave me after I kind of put in all my ideas and I wanted a talk. It gave me that as a summary, which is pretty good, I think. Saying it much better than I can probably say it. So I thank you for your attention, and may we all find freedom with change and uncertainty. Thank you.